Well, at least they made it interesting for you. But nonetheless, the West Virginia Mountaineers lose again. They now fall to 4-6 on the year. This one, a 34-17 loss to Kansas State on the road as West Virginia crawls back from a very large deficit early to eventually score that elusive touchdown and still lose to the Jayhawks. This is your WVU postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and we're going to pretty much have a similar conversation to last week, really, in what happened, how it's got so bad, especially after peaking a few weeks ago, and where we go from here. I'm going to have that conversation with friend and colleague George Gerbo of the Washington Times. And George, you actually got to watch the full-on West Virginia experience in this game. You've been covering Maryland this year, so that certainly made it difficult to watch a lot of these games earlier in the year, something that I've had to endure for the show purposes. But you had to buckle down and watch this full game, knowing you were going to be on this as well. So I do want to kind of start with the overlying question here instead of just your takeaway from the game, because I'm just going to guess they can't be good. But sure. What has happened this week and even last week? I mean, maybe it's the matchups, but what has happened to regress this team even further? 3 weeks ago, this team peaked. Daggy was playing at his best after clearly a sluggish start to the year, but now it's once again been a climb that's falling off the mountain.
Gosh, yeah, no, I've been following vicariously through you guys for the last couple of weeks because Maryland has typically been
our apologies.
Yeah, playing at the same
for what you've had to been reading
through you and Julia and everybody else on the coverage. Gosh, it's funny because I was having this conversation with somebody actually at the West Virginia Pitt basketball game last night, and it's a lack of, in my opinion, it's a lack of offensive identity. There's stuff we'll talk about with, you know, Daggy throwing interceptions and block punt and this and that. But it is, you know, if you're a veteran of this team, like you and I, of this program, as you and I are, and many Mountaineer fans are, in the Rod era, you know that they were going to run the ball and they were going to find different ways to utilize their quarterback and their backs to run the football. And the multiple 1,000-yard rushers in that time period, from KJ Harris on down to Steve Slayton and Pat White, you know, emphasize that. If you look at the Holgorsen era and coming into the Big 12 conference now a decade ago, it was the air raid and it was Geno Smith and it was Skylar Howard for the last most recent hated quarterback since Jared. Skylar Howard probably is great. You know, West Virginia fans would pine for the Skylar Howard days now
at this point,
compared to what Jared Daggy's doing. But you knew what they were going to do. You know, you had an identity, and it produced, you know, great receivers out of that time. Now you're just in this weird middle area where I guess you could say, okay, we're trying to be a balanced offense, but it's not really, you know, getting the job done. Letty Brown only goes for 85 yards today on 20 attempts, and, you know, has had some great games. The Virginia Tech one stands out on the first play from scrimmage where he busts off an 80+ yard touchdown run. But he's got to, in my opinion, the offense needs to key around him. You key around him first and you establish that, and then maybe you open it up and get some guys downfield open. But when those guys downfield are open, Jarrett Daggy seems to thrive better when they are down 2 touchdowns and, oh God, we need a touchdown on this drive, and starts hitting guys and starts converting 4th downs. But then there'll be plays where he overthrows a guy on an easily catchable route. And admittedly, I'll give him the first interception, you know, should have been a caught ball. Goes off his receiver's hands and gets picked off. So I'm not going to put that one on him, but there are overthrows and other things that happen. And West Virginia receivers had a couple of drops today, but there are things that he does that are just, you know, that you question as these games go on. And it's been a week. We're talking about this now in the 10th, 11th week of the season, Mike. These are things that have been habitual problems for West Virginia in 2021.
Yeah, and it's also a second season with Jared Daggy as the prohibited starter and many of these players there. The second season for Liddy Brown, the third season for Neil Brown, bringing in this offense that was explosive. He was regarded as an offensive genius out of Troy. The weirdness for me about the Neil Brown era, he's having success recruiting. He's bringing in recruits, a top 20 class coming up next year even. But he was brought over, thought to be this great coach, this great offensive mind, and he would then have to learn how to recruit major conference football. He's done that without any problem at all for whatever the reason. Even with conference realignment and the chaos, he's bringing kids in. They don't even know what conference they're going to be in. Doesn't matter. But the X's and O's, the actual game plan, and this team actually putting points on the board, that's seemingly been what's difficult. And yeah, you're only dealing with the horses in front of you, though. George Gerbo of the Washington Times joining me here on our WVU postgame show. WVU loses 34-17 to Kansas State. They never really were in it, even though they eventually did turn it on at the end in the weirdness of mop-up duty. Mop-up duty Daggy is definitely better than game starting Daggy for some reason here, as George was touching on. Now, George, you mentioned the offense has to go through Leddie Brown. That's clear. I think everyone would agree with that. And it did go through Leddie Brown last year when he picked up 900 plus yards on the ground in the truncated COVID season. And this year, he's had flashes, but it just has not been nearly the same guy. Not only not going through him, he's been the second or third contributor to the offense most of the year. Some games not even really involved at all. And Neil Brown, who right now is talking to my colleagues, and we'll have that video reaction here on PSL and WV Sports Now, about how sometimes the game doesn't dictate that. Sometimes they're trailing early. Sometimes they can't go to him. I've been around that press conference enough. I can tell you what's already being said. However, is it something that Leddie Brown needs to take some blame for as one of the better running backs in the country a year ago and then not doing it this year? Is it just the defenses are now scheming against him in particular that he didn't have last year? He came out of nowhere. Or does this also go to somehow another defensive Daggy that the offensive line, which had a really rough day today, is making it even harder on your game manager quarterback? And then that's why Leddie Brown just can't do anything. They did say on the halftime broadcast or on Fox Sports 1 that when Leddie Brown has over 20 carries, they usually do win, which is factual. He had 20 in this. They didn't win, and they weren't even in the game at all, which then points to maybe it's more than just him.
Yeah, I think for the defense, I think some of that, like you mentioned, the offensive line play, a lot of times coverage was good, but I want to kind of fault the receivers here. There were a couple of plays where I think it was the 1 4th down. It was a 4th down and 6 in the first half where you had empty backfield, 3 wide receivers left, 2 wide receivers right, and the 3 guys on the left just kind of ran 10-yard stop routes and turned around and stopped. And Garrett Daggy, eventually it's a coverage sack basically, and it ends the drive there for West Virginia. But they're in Kansas State's half of the field, and those guys got to know, like, hey, on first look, if we're not getting the ball in 1.5, 2 seconds, then we've got to, start moving and make it easier on our quarterback to have an outlet and help our guys out up front. So the offensive line did play bad, but I think sometimes in situations like that, the receivers need to know what's happening, the situation. Like, it's 4th down. It's not just run the route and see if he can get it to us. No, it's like, we have to extend the play. We have to keep this happening. Give credit to West Virginia. That happened on their final touchdown, on their second touchdown in the 4th quarter, where they extended the play and did that. But it's literally, it's the same thing almost week out with this
Do you sympathize? I'm trying to ask different questions.
It just like, I want to mistake football. And ironically, this is kind of something I'm used to seeing it because I've seen it a little bit with Maryland. Maryland has had opportunities. Maryland had an opportunity to win a game against Penn State last week. They were tied into the 4th quarter with that game. Penn State wins 31-17 or whatever, and it looks bad, but it wasn't that bad. It's penalty for Maryland. It's penalties. For West Virginia, it's penalties and turnovers. And,
if you look at the box score and you didn't watch this West Virginia game, that's actually a perfect comparison because Daggy, he did almost 300. It was 268. So that's on the latter half of 200. He did have a couple of touchdown passes, the quarterback rating of 115, 27 completions, multiple receivers, 60 plus yards. Leddie Brown, an average of 4.3, including a 20-yarder. That's not horrendous. It's not great, but they've had worse days and won. So you look at the stat sheet and don't watch the game, you're going to think, well, maybe you're almost being too tough on the team because Kansas State actually is pretty good. They've already secured a bowl game. But when you watch this, it looks like these stats shouldn't even be there. It really looked like the eye test looked like they were awful in this one.
And like, if we take away, I guess I'm trying to put lipstick on a pig here. If we take away the block punt for the touchdown, first time that's happened, I think I saw from a colleague on
Right.
Twitter in, over a decade against West Virginia,
Right.
then, we're talking kind of closer to a tie game at points in the second half. And then maybe that gets your offense in a different kind of mindset, as opposed to Daggy, who's always, like
Right.
we're saying, seeming to play from behind. But take that mistake out. Vandarius Cowan, I mean, on the targeting thing, good Lord.
Yeah. Jeez.
It's that's an interception. That's an interception by Lowe. And you turn some of the tide. It wasn't going to be an easy game, but in my opinion, and I was reminded by a friend of ours that I picked West Virginia to win this game because I thought it was a winnable game. I thought it looks bad. They doubled up, but I thought West Virginia could win this game going into it. And if you've got the interception and Cowan doesn't go into the guy, literally he gets this close to the guy, Mike, and he just like decides to throw in the extra head thing, like watching it on replay.
Right.
And then it's roughing the passer and it's targeting. He's gone for the game, and add literal injury to insult. He's holding his left arm as he goes off the field as if he like had a stinger on it.
Right.
So, don't do that type of thing. They did not get flagged for a play out of bounds on the West Virginia sideline where they got a little bit of an extra shove on the quarterback, and the quarterback, right at the white line, and the quarterback has to literally hurdle over the West Virginia bench, the physical bench there. And then the guy is following, I apologize, I forget his number, but he's following after him, like getting close to him, kind of like half taunting him, like, what the heck? Just, don't do those type of things. And a lot of it, and I've seen what the fan base is saying, and a lot of it, I think, does go on Neil Brown, in that in some cases this team does not appear ready.
They will get there. Yes.
They don't appear ready to play, and they're in the wrong mindset. And I think a lot of that goes to what you are doing during the week and how you're being prepared by this coaching staff.
Yeah, George Gerbo of the Washington Times. I said this during the game. I'll say this again here. For a team that has their warts, and we knew they were going to have some entering this season, West Virginia is one of the dumbest teams in the country. And that's how you get this record. They should have had a couple more wins this year. You mentioned the Maryland game, and we've now seen kind of Maryland and West Virginia are almost similar teams. If they played again, it could easily be the opposite result the other way. West Virginia had 4 turnovers in that game. If you flip it even to 2 turnovers, they're probably right in there, if not winning that game. They've had dumb penalties throughout. The Callan targeting, for anybody that covers college football at all, any of your colleagues, anyone who's just a fan of the sport, if you have a problem with targeting, and no one loves the call, it's often miscalled around the country and it's in every game, annoyingly so. That's why it's there. That's why it's never going to go away, because that was just stupidity. There was no need for it. That was pure targeting. That was honestly, they're probably going to really do this. That's probably going to be on the tape for every competition committee in pro and college football, and why we need some targeting. That might get it to the next level if you're going to have targeting, because that was just textbook ridiculousness. It did kind of ruin that drive. And yeah, it's just kind of boneheaded mistakes. And we'll get to Neil Brown in a second, but we did already hear at the end of other games in which maybe they were quote unquote winnable, as you said, in which they didn't just lose. If it's winnable and you lose by a field goal at the end, okay, even a touchdown. But it's quote unquote winnable and they're not even in the game at all. That's the problem. So if you have a winnable game, you're not even really competing in. Neil Brown has responded before saying, it's on me. I take it. We weren't prepared. I'm surprised. Like, for example, after the Virginia Tech win, big win, despite they've been a little exposed this year. And then West Virginia turns around and he admits, we weren't ready. Well, yeah, okay. I think people do like, fans and media, that Neil Brown takes it on the chin. And unlike some of his predecessors, they're not going to dance around and make excuses. He's just always going to take it. In walk of life, we like that. Someone takes the blame when they're wrong. But eventually, in year 3 of a major conference program, some of your players are in there now. Your system's in there now. The cupboard's not as bare as it was when you took over. You can't have the excuse of we weren't ready. You're literally getting paid millions of dollars to make the team ready. He's not going to be getting fired anytime soon, but I no longer like hearing we weren't ready. Like, I agree that you're taking it on the chin. That's great. It's better than what we've heard and seen before, and we do around the rest of the country. But that cannot be the comment any longer. to this point.
This late in the season. And again, like trying to look objectively at how this season has gone, aside from the Baylor game and aside from the Oklahoma State game,
right?
All those other games were winnable. You mentioned the Maryland game. Daggy throws a corner fade that gets picked off that, as West Virginia's inside the 5. We know the problems they've had scoring in the red zone and just scoring offensive touchdowns.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma game obviously
should have beat Oklahoma. They couldn't move the ball.
And still in Norman was a winnable game. So all of those, they beat Texas Christian. Texas at home next week. Is a game that, Texas is not back for anybody that was unaware. And
they are not back. They are not back.
They are not back. And we'll see how well folks turn out at Mountaineer Field, Milan Puskar Stadium for it. But it's West Virginia's final home game. And then they've got Kansas after that. And Kansas is 1-8, but Kansas then put a scare into Oklahoma. So anything's up. Again, they're all winnable and they're all losable. But
anything is up in the air.
Anything's up in the air. And it's just when you're looking for like where, they get outclassed in the Baylor game, period. And, you said, Neil Brown took credit and, had no semblance of an offense, and Oklahoma State has a really good defense. And so those games, no chance in. But these other games is where the things that your staff, even though you may not have the athletes that some of these other programs may have, like Oklahoma with Caleb Williams, Spencer Rattler and everything, you've got a chance to compete and play. And a lot of that comes back on him. And it just
has to. It's not even anyone being hard on the guy. It just has to come on someone.
Nice guy. Everybody widely acknowledges nice guy,
right.
This and that, but there are things that they can do better. And when you are doing the same things over and over again, and is it how you use Garrett Green? Is it this and that? All those type of things come into question. But it's to me, the defense has played like a top 15 defense in the country.
I don't think you can ask much more from the defense.
Yeah,
right?
The scores may not reflect that, but the defense is one of the top 25 defenses, in my opinion, in the country. And I don't even know the numbers if they bear that out. But just watching them play, they've got guys that can do things. Impact play. It's not just, we're going to stop. No, they got playmakers. They got guys that can intercept the ball. They've got a good pass rush. But then you go to the offensive side of the ball, and it just often looks like they're wandering around out there without a sense of direction. And some of that's got to come back onto the leadership, if not all of that.
Right. I mean, and when you're a leader and when you're not just a coordinator, and especially at a major conference program and a school like West Virginia with some pedigree and with some expectations, you are in charge of it all. You're not just in charge of the offense or the defense. And one side is stepping up. And the defense, I think, has been very underrated for 2 years now, because last year, I do actually have the ranking in front of me. They were number 1 in the country through week 5 last year. And that wasn't a good team. That makes no sense. Nobody would have figured that. And that was off of scandal. They didn't have their defensive coordinator. They still don't have that guy. They're still kind of in a makeshift effort in terms of coaching defensively. So I don't think you can ask much more from them. The defense, it's hard to give them an L for the Oklahoma game or even any others. They didn't lose that game. They put up the best defensive effort against the Sooners the entire season to this point of anybody in the country. And then the offense didn't get it done. George Gerbo here of the Washington Times. George, I do want to ask you, and you alluded to this already, and this has kind of been a question all season long, especially now with the bowl season not even guaranteed. They now need to win out to get in a bowl game. And I think we can agree, because they are West Virginia, because 15th winningest program, fans around the country. If they get to 6, someone's going to invite them to something. They're going to play in some postseason game somewhere. Won't be great, but they'll be in something. And that is money for the school. You'd rather have that than not. However, that's not even guaranteed at this point. And Daggy could be back next year. That's something that I don't know if anyone's aware of. He could be back next year. He could be the starter again next year. Obviously, Neil Brown prefers him to anybody else. They have a personal connection. He seemingly has regressed this year despite having some flashes, needs a lot more help around him. We've seen some flashes from Garrett Green, but even in practice, he hasn't shown that he can pass enough to be a starter. You do need to pass. This isn't going to be a Pat White spread offense like you mentioned earlier. But we don't see Garrett Green at all in this game. We've seen him a little bit in recent games, but basically sprinkling 2 or 3 passes, a lot less as the season has progressed. And they're still losing. So to me, this is the opportunity to see him more. Number one, Do you want to see him more? How much would you like to see him? And are you in any way considering a hook that if you're down big in the Texas game, you then know in the back of your mind the bowl season is done? Are you then thinking, now I'm hashtag done with Daggy, as we've discussed on past post-game shows, and I got to at least see what I have with Garrett Green. If he goes out there, throws 3 picks, can't complete a pass, we lose by 40, what's the difference than losing by 15 when you're already out of the postseason? Would you now really have that conversation that has been there, but now I feel like the engine's got to get ramped up, and at minimum, do you want to see more from Garrett Green, or at least see some from Garrett Green? He didn't get in this game.
Yeah, you've got to know. I think if you're Neil Brown and for West Virginia fans, you've got to know at least what you have in Garrett Green. I mean, the most popular person in Morgantown seemingly is always the backup quarterback,
right?
But nobody really has. We're talking about 10-ish, going through the game log, 1 completion against Texas Tech, 4 completions against Baylor, 1 against Oklahoma State, 1 against TCU. It's hardly. He played a significant amount in the Long Island game, obviously, but that's might as well have been last century at this point. So you've just got to have an idea of what you have for Daggy. It was kind of interesting to me in the first half, watching him come off the field after it was the play right before Casey Legg missed the first field goal. It was only his second miss of the season, and Neil Brown's kind of talking to him, and it's more like talking at him because, Daggy's like walking by him, going to the bench type of thing. Like you sometimes wonder what, that relationship needs to be the foundation from which everything else is built on for West Virginia on offense. And it's just kind of been this up and down thing. When he racks up passing yardage, they do well. If they get over 300 yards, West Virginia's got a chance to win these games. They may be close, but they're going to be in it more often than not. But when they get down, it's where you start having the problems, and he loses confidence there. So yeah, if you're a Mountaineer fan, probably hearing the words Jared Daggy is coming back probably sends chills through your spine. But
I'll tell you right now, the recruit that's the top fiver that's coming in that everyone loves, they don't want him to start next year. So you're looking at another year, and next year someone's going to have to start, and it's going to be, if I had to put money down, it's going to either be named Jared Daggy or Garrett Green. And if it's Green, it admittedly could be worse, but you don't know. It's an unknown. I don't know how anyone could definitively say he can pass or can't. You mentioned 4 completions. He's only had 10 or so pass attempts. And when he comes in, it's off of running plays, design run plays, where passes are just kind of dumpers because the run play breaks down. I can't actually recall one time where Neil Brown drew up a pass play and said, this is for you to pass. So maybe they're just figuring he can't be a starting quarterback because we haven't seen in practice.
It's a pseudo looking wildcat is what they've basically utilized Garrett Green as in these games.
But when you're a quarterback like that, I think the problem is too, for some people, when you're a quarterback like that, you're not going to win a job from somebody in practice because you're not getting enough design for you. So if Garrett Green has a chance to seal this job, it has to be in game action. And it almost leads some West Virginia fans. Maybe the hope is this team actually gets down at halftime significantly against Texas. And then you might be forced to see him
rooting for yourself to lose.
That almost seems to be the only way you're going to get Garrett Green. You mentioned that relationship between Daggy and Brown. That's kind of an underrated issue here, which is very interesting. Obviously, it shouldn't matter between the two of them on how Daggy plays, but they've known each other since he was 12. Neil Brown coached his brother. So it is a decade-long track.
It's his guy. That's his guy.
So that's part of it. And I feel like that if we don't see more from Garrett Green, it is going to be fair in these press conferences. If I'm there, I guess I got to do it. If somebody else is there, they're going to have to do this for me when I'm hosting these shows, of just asking the simple question, why are we not seeing more of Garrett Green? If he is going to say it's because there's not enough in practice, or I'm going to ride with Daggy, okay. But I think that it's a fair question to ask, because with their personal relationship, if Garrett Green doesn't even get a shot in this season, is not even a bowl season, it's going to look like he's riding the personal connection a little bit far, which has now led them to a 4-6 record. The Mountaineers do lose this 34-17. They never really were in it against Kansas State there on the road. And yes, Texas comes up. Kansas then after that one, figuring Kansas is a win, but nothing is guaranteed. It's winnable, but it's also losable. And I think Texas is winnable, but also losable. They're not back, but they might be back enough to beat West Virginia based on what we're seeing to this point here. George Gerbo of the Washington Times joining me here on the post-game show. Just a couple more minutes here. I do want to kind of ask what your keys are and what your thoughts are on those two games coming up. Certainly the Texas game, because yeah, they're not back, but they certainly can put up some more points than what West Virginia has been putting up in. And I'd imagine if WVU gets down trailing early, that's going to be a problem. And then where are you as still an observer or as an alum, still somebody rooting for the program, even while you're covering another, in terms of trusting this climb? Neil Brown has the support of Shane Lyons, the athletic program. I've heard that directly from them. He's not going anywhere. But next year, this is crazy, and it might kind of snuck up on you. It's going into year 4.
Yeah.
That's a while. Most college coaches in the country don't get 3 years. You're getting your recruits in there then. You no longer can say this is anything to do with Holgorsen. This is the full Neil Brown era. Yeah, we don't even know who would be the quarterback next year, but eventually you got to be ranked. If you can debate quarterback off wins, but I don't think for coaches, you eventually got to be evaluated off wins and losses. There's just not enough wins versus the losses. So where are you on trusting this climb of the program?
I think, kind of alluding to what you were talking about, bowls. There's probably a good section of the country of people that follow college football that are like, directional, blah, 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 playing in the Bad Boy Mowers Bowl or the insert internet-based platform sponsor here bowl. And I get it. It's gotten a little wacky from the day, bowls were a big deal when that was the only thing and there wasn't a BCS and there wasn't a college football playoff. And admittedly, the college football playoff has, in my opinion, cheapen some of the bowl things, but it's still, I think, for teams that are doing this climb thing, like Maryland is as well. They've got one win from bowl eligibility.
Yeah.
I think there is there's something tangible to grab. Your seniors, it's a nice little, hey, I get to do this on my way out the door. But for the rest of the people in your program, for fans, maybe not so much, but I think for the players, it's, hey, we got a taste of what this is and what the experience is when all these sponsors, they've got giveaways and Xboxes and, all these other type of things.
They won a bowl game last year.
Yeah. And new stuff you mentioned money and new stuff for the weight room and the program. Yeah. It is a significant enough windfall that it is worth it to go to a bowl game on the financial side. And then just on the momentum and, experience side, when your younger guys get a taste of that, then it's like, hey, I want to do this, but I want to do it bigger. I want to do it at another level. I don't want to play on December 21st in a bowl. I want to play on, New Year's Eve on a bowl or January, So I do believe that there is something tangible for those guys to go after. Their work's cut out for him here. Honest to goodness, the Oklahoma game was kind of like the tipping point when it's like, okay, this team has shown it can compete against one of the best teams in the country. And now it should be like, let's see where we can go out here and take advantage and win games. They did it against Iowa State, admittedly, upset Iowa State at home.
I think it's fair to say that's Neil Brown's biggest victory, because I think that even trumps the Virginia Tech win despite the rivalry, because Virginia Tech lost 4 straight after that. Iowa State is still a ranked opponent.
And the Virginia Tech game, for as much as I enjoyed it, was classic West Virginia hanging on for dear life in the second half because we can't score any points.
That was a losable game right there. Yeah.
Hey, look, we're up 21 or 24 and whatever. And God, let's play. We can hold on and finish the game out. That was the Virginia Tech game. But no, the Iowa State game against a ranked team late in the season. Yeah. A team that, if I recall correctly, was a top 15 team in the preseason. So.
22nd at the time of the game, but 20 earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they've again, I believe Texas, going to have to fix a lot of things here, but I believe Texas coming into Morgantown, they've been less successful in Austin, save for that great Will Grier run at the end of the game a couple years ago in 18.
I'll give you the horns down.
The horns down in 2018 that did it. Yeah. But they have been successful against Texas at times. It's really the only one of the big programs in that conference. They had been previously successful against Kansas State, but not so much today. TCU, they've been successful against, and crazily, Texas. They haven't been able to beat Oklahoma since they've been in the conference, but they have been successful against Texas. So I think they can do that and then just don't get trapped going to Kansas. And it sounds crazy to say after how ridiculous this game was, but there is a path there for for a bowl game. And if you lose to Texas, then maybe it is Neil Brown playing for some semblance. I know he's been extended, but some semblance of credibility with this.
I think if
base.
you lose to Texas and Garrett Green doesn't play at all against Kansas, that's a dereliction of duty, because that doesn't make sense. You can't get in a postseason game. No one's saying he can't be back next year. He's going to come back next year. But at that point, I don't know what the defense would be. What are you, though, on Neil Brown in terms of trust in this climb overall? I mean, we're talking about this year. We're talking about this game. Obviously, you want to be in a bowl game. I think the issue is for some, George, even off of what you're talking about. Yeah, I don't think anyone thought that it was a conference title, or I don't think anyone thought that maybe even a better in terms of a date of a bowl game getting after Christmas. But last year, they were in a legit bowl game. They beat a legit team. It was a reasonable situation, and that was after the cupboard was bare. So that felt like you're actually climbing. You are climbing. There's a hashtag. There's a moniker. You're climbing. If you then have the next year where you're in a worse bowl game or not one at all, that's not climbing. Just physically climbing means you have to go up. It's defined as going up. You're climbing. You can't go neutral. Neutral is not a climb. That's not a climb. If you fall, if you're going backwards, that's not a climb. And I think the problem is, too, this was the year to do it and to actually climb. I think for a lot of fans, if they would have gotten a decent bowl game this year and then next year it was a bad year, Neil Brown could come out there and say, I have a great recruit coming in. Daggy didn't get it done. Garrett Green, maybe he's not a legit starter. We were young next year. Give us that mulligan season. You can't have a mulligan season if this year goes in the tube, because then you have 4 straight mulligan seasons. So where are you in terms of trusting that it's going to actually climb, since now the evidence shows you're actually going backwards, whether that's fair or unfair? When you do, this is what actually my previous guest said, who you also know, a former colleague of ours from our college radio days, a little bit before our time, but Kristenenko made the comment that this is the problem when you throw out a catchy hashtag. Yeah. It's cool. It helps the social media department. But if you do it, people will hold you to it. And when you have a hashtag that you're being held to, it looks even worse when you go backwards. But right now, that kind of feels like the program is going backwards after climbing.
Minnesota's caught wind of that with when rowing the boat leads to you losing to Bowling Green when you were favored by 28 or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Can you trust that there's going to actually be a climb, or maybe was that hashtag a little bit ahead of the curve, and maybe we need to wait longer, or what? Yeah.
So it's you're firmly in neutral right now. You've got the car shifted into neutral. It's not even rolling really. It's just kind of like doing its inertia thing. Yeah, everybody, the people who graduated with us, people as well in that same, late 2005 to 2010 window, all agree it's time to fire Neil Brown. So, that's
not going to happen. But
that's not going to happen. So, that you've lost a certain section of the fan base. Definitely, I would say it's more than half of the fan base. I'd say about at least 60% are willing to. Hey, there's literally nothing here. You had an elite defense for 2 years, and God bless if we had people pining for the days of remembering the days of Jeff Castile and that type of defense. And man, if you could have this type of defense back then, what West Virginia could have done. But you've almost wasted an elite defense in college football for 2 years now with a and so people are just like, and they understand the conference that they're in. I'll give you this, Mike. This is kind of an interesting thing to throw in, is just the situation, the next round of unsettling of college football. Does West Virginia need to show that I believe, yes, that they can be like an 8 to 10 win program from time to time to be able to get them into an ACC or into whatever the next thing is going to be. Currently, the Big 12 is going to add 4 teams, and they're going to be at 12. And that includes bringing in, Central Florida and giving West Virginia some help here on the East Coast, theoretically.
Yeah,
and maybe
Cincinnati.
And Cincinnati. Right. But maybe West Virginia doesn't stay in maybe that's still unsettled. So it's time, and that we're talking 2023, 2024 with that type of stuff, but that can always be moved up with buyouts and whatnot. So I think that you need to demonstrate at least that your team it's college football and it's the Big 12, and it's always been an offensive driven league. And God bless the defense. Love them. Amazing to see that type of stuff, but they need to show explosiveness on the firepower on the offensive side of the ball. When they had Geno Smith, they did it, even though they were losing some games, but they need to be able to show that. And Neil Brown offensively, and it goes back to my first point, that what is the identity? West Virginia in games where Letty Brown rushes for under 100 yards, they are 1-5. The one win, that Long Island game where you get everybody out early and you beat them 66-0. West Virginia.
Yeah, if you look at what he's done against FBS versus FCS, it is totally different. It's night and day.
I apologize. 1-6, including today's loss against Kansas State. West Virginia in games when Letty Brown goes for over 100 yards, they're 3-0. So there needs to be not a fear of working the kid to death. He needs to have the ball in his hands. He is your biggest, no disrespect to Bryce Ford Wheaton and the rest of the receiving core. He's your biggest offensive talent right now. And West Virginia's offense has always revolved around who your offensive playmaker is, whether that was Geno Smith to Kevin White, whether it was Steve Slayton, Pat White and Steve Slayton. So it needs to be Jarrett Daggy to Letty Brown, whether it's screen passes, whether it's out of the backfield on handoffs. And that has to be the bread and butter, because they lack an identity. And it kills them week in and week out in games that could be close, Mike. In games that could be close.
And you look at other running backs, even going to the Pittsburgh Steelers here with Najee Harris. He had a slow start earlier in the year. The way they jump-started him, they gave him 14 passes in a game to get his hand on the football.
Comfort with the ball.
He didn't run well in that game, but he got a lot of targets. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing yards on the ground. And that involves the offensive line, and it's a deeper conversation, but you got to at least be involved in these games. You at least feel better about losing one when he gets 20 carries and 80-plus yards than some of these losses earlier in the year. He literally had 17 carries, and they would lose by a couple scores. You got to at least feed the beast a little bit, and if you're going to lose, then you're going to lose. But to have under 20 carries, that seems inexcusable. And, I will tell you, I don't think it's so much even from our friends and our colleague in this kind of like minute circle that we live in. I literally had former players messaging me, and then some outwardly putting out their thoughts, totally turning on Neil Brown.
You're starting to see it on Twitter. Guys like Rasul Douglas, absolutely.
The last couple of weeks, especially, they were even giving him time at the beginning of this season. These are the same guys that were very much in favor of Neil Brown when he got the job. And of course, it's a fickle business, but that changes the tone a little bit. And I also heard initially upon being hired, Mike Logan's one that I'll bring up that I actually know and have talked to and covered. He told me that he didn't feel welcome at the program under Dana Holgorsen at all. For whatever reason, he immediately upon getting hired, Neil Brown called Mike Logan, said you're welcome. And Pat McAfee has been very outspoken. I didn't talk to him, but very outspoken that he has been welcomed, and he didn't feel welcome under Dana Holgorsen, didn't even feel welcome.
That's 100%.
Under Bill Stewart. So that's all good. And that's all necessary. And he can be friends with everybody and everyone loves him. And he is still getting a little softballs in terms of people want him to do well. But eventually the win's gotta be there. And if you just aren't having success on the field, eventually it will, eventually maybe there's at least a minimal compromise. This has been brought up to some, that maybe there's a meeting at the end of this year where Shane Lyon said to him, everyone loves you. We don't want to get rid of you, but you have lost your play calling duties, or you need to discuss this with somebody else before a decision is made. You can't just be lord of offense.
Or is it you like the head coach enough and you find somebody who's an offensive specialist who can take those guys that you have and those guys that are coming in and change it around. And I'll give credence to your point there that they in the renovation of the Pushkar Center, the locker room area and the weight room and
the facilities are there, right?
They put in from the videos I've seen, really cool alumni locker room. So when you have guys like Noel Devine,
I've been there. It's fantastic.
When you have guys like Pac-Man Jones come back, there admittedly was a drop off from the Holgorsen era where you just came out of, in my opinion, and statistically the best 4-year stretch of football in the 125 plus years of West Virginia University has played. And it was just kind of like those guys weren't important anymore. And Pat has voiced that, and some other guys have voiced that. So welcoming those guys in, even though they can't play on the field for you now, is, I believe, a good conduit to helping those guys.
Major Harris a shot last
exactly. Week. Why not? In retiring numbers and things like that. But that alumni locker room and that type of stuff, and seeing those guys is a big part of keeping people engaged in that program, which leads down the line to recruiting, which is how these other programs programs that are perennially good in America. They send guys to the pros, they send guys to the league, and then those guys from the league come back and they reciprocate, and it's a circle of life, and it continues and it continues.
Yeah,
and that
right.
is something they are doing well. But it also has to go well on the field for the guys who are currently on that team and on that.
You
field.
want them when they get there and they see all this facilities really nice, and then they go to the game and they're like, "Oh God, what am I watching here? We got some issues to deal with here." And I also don't think, because even going to the backyard brawl that you mentioned last night, I heard a lot from current players, even our guys that are covering those two teams throughout our network. They said, talking to players, prior to the game, they didn't really feel an animosity towards each other. They're transfer portal players. They're not from the area. They hadn't played in the rivalry, so it was diminished prior to the game, meaning you cannot just figure guys who are now 18 years old, 16 to 18, are going to get on YouTube and watch a video of the success of the program and say, I want to go join that. They're not going to just know it. Yeah. You need to be able to teach them by having Pat McAfee in the living room with you.
You got to have evangelists, basically. They have to evangelize.
You do. And this isn't Nick Saban in Alabama. You're going to have to kind of explain things. You're going to have to say, hey, 15th, 20th program, we've done this. We were doing this. We had this Heisman candidate. We had Major Harris, etc. If you don't articulate, if you don't have any of those examples, if they're not with you to help it out, it will be a harder recruiting pool. Although Neil Brown has recruited well. That has not been the problem to this point. George, thanks for the time there. The Mountaineers do continue to climb, or coast and neutral, really, but we'll see what happens next week against Texas and then Kansas. Is this team still
the car might need a push? It's in neutral, but it might need a push. So.
Yeah, I've had to do that a time or two, including down in Morgantown back in college, push a car out of a parking spot. So maybe they need that. They need a bunch of guys to kind of push this, get someone foot on the gas and push this forward. But in all honesty, the fixes, Neil Brown's not going anywhere. Garrett Daggy very much might be back as the quarterback. So if those things are possibly the case, something else is going to have to give here. I don't know what it is, but you at least got to take care of business in the quote unquote winnable games. And they're just simply not doing that. The Mountaineers lose this one 34-17 to Kansas State. Again, not really in it at all. George Gerbo of the Washington Times there joining me. George, I appreciate the time.
As always.
Mountaineers lose death taxes, and I feel like similar shows we've had to put forth here. Is WVU now 4-6? They will face Texas next week. They need the win. They now need to win out to get in the bowl game. And if you want to get in that bowl game and that's important to you, you need to win out. You need to play better. Or maybe some of you are rooting that they don't, because maybe that's the real way to fix things and kind of force the hand of some certain things. So we will see what happens if this climb actually climbs or continues to coast to neutral.